Hey there YouTube. So in this video I wanted to cover the differences in filing fees and procedures for a Delaware LLC versus a Delaware Corporation. So an LLC is a limited liability company versus a Delaware Corporation is a for-profit corporate entity formed under Delaware law. Okay, so each entity has to file something with the state of Delaware every year, and they both have to pay some form of annual filing fee to keep the entity in good standing under state law. But the filing procedures and the fees are vastly different. So what we're going to do is we're going to cover the differences on this slide. Okay, so we're going to start with the LLC. So the limited liability company, Delaware makes it quite easy for LLCs, frankly. So an LLC has to file an annual report and pay a flat fee of $300 per entity, okay? The due date to filing this is June 1st of the year following the year of formation. So if, for example, you formed your entity in April of 2020, you'll have to pay that $300 fee by June 1st, 2021. And the nice thing about this is it truly is a fixed fee. You don't have to adjust the fee based on how many owners there are, what the assets are of the company, how many LLC units were issued and are outstanding. None of that matters. And so that's the nice thing about the LLC filings for Delaware is they are quite straightforward. The other nice thing is when you file that LLC report to Delaware, you're just paying the fee. You don't have to list owners. You don't have to list addresses, nothing. You really have to list nothing. And that's in stark contrast to what we see with the corporate entity in Delaware. So let's move on to the Delaware For-Profit Corp and see how that differs. Okay, so we have for-profit corporations in Delaware. These are the entities where you'll see the tagline will be Corporation, Incorporated, Inc., maybe even Limited Company. These are for-profit entities in Delaware that are taxed as C corporations, or maybe they filed an election to be taxed as an S corp. At the end of the day, it's still a corporate body formed under Delaware law, so you're going to be paying fees under that structure. So the base filing fee for a Delaware corporation is $50, and then you pay a minimum of $175 in franchise taxes. So at a minimum, if you have a Delaware for-profit corporation, you're looking at $225 per year. Now, the fee can get much higher pretty quickly depending on how you structure the organization. Okay, so before we go into there, let's talk about the filing deadline. So the franchise tax filing deadlines is March 1st of each year following the year of formation. So you've got to file much sooner than with the LLC, which only has a June 1 deadline. So if you have a corporate entity, you're filing within 2 months after the close of the calendar year, versus if you're filing for an LLC, you have until June 1 to file this report. Okay, so deadline is a big difference. Okay, so let's talk about the fee computation, because this is where I see a lot of people get in trouble. Corporations in Delaware compute their franchise tax payment, so that's this $175 piece. They compute the franchise taxes under one of two methods. You have the Authorized Shares Method or the Assumed Par Value Method. Now, the Authorized Shares Method is the default method. So under the Authorized Shares Method, and what's important here is to reference your articles of incorporation. You want to look at how many shares you had authorized in your articles of incorporation. Smaller companies with a good lawyer and have no anticipation of going public will list 5,000 shares or less, maybe 1,000. But I see a lot of kind of prefabbed articles where they're authorizing 10 million shares, 20 million shares, at par values of 0.0001. The Authorized Shares Method under the default method is where a lot of people get burned here, because under that method, your franchise tax payment goes up from $175 to as high as $200,000, depending on how many authorized shares you have outstanding. So, for example, you're paying $85 for every additional $10,000. So for companies that have issued 10 million shares, or strike that, for companies that have authorized 10 million shares, 20 million shares, it's not uncommon for them to get a franchise tax bill for $85,000 plus. And that's because Delaware, again, they look at the authorized shares method. How many shares do you have authorized under your articles of organization? And that's how they compute the tax. Now, obviously for startups that don't have that kind of money, that's a massive tax bill to get. So the reprieve you have is either using the assumed par value method. So under the assumed par value method, it's a much different computation. The idea is the tax is calculated based on the number of shares authorized and the total assets of the company at year end. So if you have a company that doesn't have a lot of assets, the franchise tax computation will come down quite a bit. Now you'll pay at least $400, so a little different than the $225. But under this assumed par value method, you can have a lot of shares authorized and outstanding and still not get hit with a $200,000 tax bill. So the assumed par value method, the computation is a little more complicated than the scope of this video, so I'm not going to go into too much detail on how that is calculated. There's another video I have that covers that, but the main takeaway here is if you have an LLC, you're paying $300 a year in Delaware. If you have a corporation, you're paying at least $225, but it could be upwards of a couple $100,000. Depending on how many shares you have authorized and outstanding and what the assets are of your company. So very, very important to consider, not only when you're picking LLC versus Corp, but when you pick Corp, how many shares are you authorized to issue in your corporate charter, because it can drastically impact your corporate franchise tax bill when you file by March 1st of each year. So that covers it for this video. I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, please leave me a comment below. Happy to answer those. And of course, I hope to see you again soon. Please leave me a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel if you aren't already. And again, take care. I hope to see you again soon. Thank you.